Joe Aston was from 2011 until 2023 the chief writer of the much-loved Rear Window column in the Australian Financial Review. For much of this time, Joe was both the most loved and the most feared journalist in the country, taking what was largely a gossip column and turning it into, without peer, the best example of crusading, brave, investigative journalism in Australia. Joe hung up his pen last year and turned to writing his first book, The Chairman's Lounge, an in-depth account of the Alan Joyce era at Qantas. Joe, I was trying to think of a book that has gotten more publicity than yours. The only one I could come up with was Harry Potter, all over them.
The Bible?
The Bible was like...
It was more of a slow. That was more of a slow
burn. That's true. I mean, it's held up in some senses.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably the top three is Harry Potter, Chairman's Lounge, and the Bible. Top three titles in Australia.
In that order.
You've essentially become Australia's own J.K. Rowling.
Oh,
and
gee,
possibly,
honestly, Adam, you're embarrassing me.
Possibly more famous than a lot of the celebrity CEOs and also the rogues you actually wrote about. Did you expect this kind of attention when you started writing the book?
I didn't anticipate the velocity of the interest in what is a very narrow part of the story, to be honest, the political part. Well, there's a political part of the book, and then there's an even narrower part, which is the upgrades that politicians get from Qantas and have for 30, 40 years, and it looks like we'll continue to do. And then an even narrower part of that, which is Anthony Albanese's part in that. I think I certainly never expected it to become the story, and I am unsurprised by the opposition's sudden disinterest in the story because I think they've a few days in gone, hang on, this could actually mean that people might start talking about the upgrades we took. And also, worst case scenario, we might actually have to change something and then none of us will be able to take upgrades.
Absolutely.
And that is a worst case scenario.
In business, we would call that a lack of power because your competitor has exactly the same strengths and weaknesses that you have.
Yes.
And so it's better not to compete on that altogether. Yeah. I'm totally unsurprised that that's happened. Can I just make a complaint to begin with? I've got a complaint to start with. Yeah, your book forced me, for the first time in maybe a decade, to use a Kindle. Because it was out of stock everywhere. It was out of stock on Amazon. Yeah, how do you end up out of stock on Amazon?
Yeah, well, I think just as I did not anticipate the interest, booksellers underestimated the interest, and that was selling out very quickly. I think they're starting to get on top of it. I think Amazon's going to be back in stock and next day delivery in the next few days. But I know people who pre-ordered when we revealed the cover a month before publication, and they only got their books yesterday, and that's like 10 days after publication date. So Amazon's Prime promise has been broken by...
You've busted Amazon.
Oh.
Now, there's another thing. You've got a claim to fame on Amazon. I kind of wanted to read it before we caught up, so I went for the Kindle, which just... You love the Kindle. It's trash. This reminded me after 10 years of why I hate it so much. Anyway, however, you've got the distinction on Amazon of being not really discounted, which is... very unusual. It's a few percent discount.
It was to start with. I think there was like a 15% discount to start with, but I now think it's now down to 5%.
Which is very unusual on Amazon. Like almost every book is discounted 15 to 25% off retail price on Amazon. So that is a genuine claim to fame that you have, not being discounted by Amazon.
Of all the things I wanted on my tombstone.
Not discounted by Amazon.
Well, no one ever talks about how many books they sell. I was going to
ask you, do you know numbers? And can you...
No, who knows numbers? Are you prepared to say the numbers?
I have provisional numbers that I was told today that I'm not sure I'm allowed to share, so I might just not, if that's okay.
You've turned into everything that you hate. Not sharing numbers with direct questioning.
I exude a genuine lack of transparency already, and I'm ashamed.
But that's why you're different, because you don't say that you're being transparent whilst not saying the numbers.
Well, maybe that's a small
win.
Yeah. What was your target? How many did you hope to sell? Because a bestseller in Australia is like 5,000 copies, so it's pretty easy.
Yeah, and we're pretty much there.
And so is 100,000 within realms, do you think? Would you be one of the biggest selling ever business
I couldn't
books?
imagine selling that many copies. I really couldn't. They printed 15 in the first run.
That sounds like a very low run.
And then they've already done a second run.
Yeah.
The second run is not as big as the first run. but
you got a lot of Kindle as well on top of that.
Plus audio, which is really big now as well, and that's opened a whole. I really, as an author, really happy about that development, because there's a lot of people who've come up to me and said, "Oh, I don't read books, never have, but I've listened to your book."
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people consume books in that way.
You did a very smart thing with the audiobook. You did it yourself.
Yes.
I looked at downloading that instead of, because I don't really do audiobooks. It was 16 hours. I thought, I'm not going to sit through that, even at 1.5 speed, but still, it's a long time. Like,
It is a long time. Try reading it out.
No, I was going to say, surely, how many sittings was that?
I reckon I did it in about 5 sessions of 4 hours at a time.
That's a hardcore. And you just one take straight through.
No, not totally. Like, you'd stop, you'd restart sentences when you stumbled over things, and you go back at the end once the editors have gone through and seen bits that you've stumbled over, and you do pickups.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just sort of smashed on through at the beginning of October, right before I went over to the UK for a couple of weeks just before the book came out to get a break, thinking it might, be a bit busy when the book came out. Didn't anticipate it being this busy, but...
How do you reflect on your own celebrity now? I sort of half joked about it in the intro, but you are genuinely one of the most well-known journo in Australia, I'd say now, and a genuinely well-known person, which could be hard to deal with for a lot of people. How have you dealt with your support fame?
I'm not trying to be falsely humble here. I don't think that's right. I don't get stopped on the street every day.
I'm shocked you don't get stopped on the street.
But that's the beauty of being a print journalist.
Yeah, well, people won't know what he looks like.
Yeah.
If he wore a T-shirt, I'm Joe Aston. Apart from it might get beaten, but but you'd be stopped if people know the name.
It just depends, Obviously, if I'm on a plane or I'm at a business hotel, it's more likely that someone's going to talk to me. But out there at Westfield or at the beach, no one knows who I am, and nor should they. I mean, I'm not a mainstream celebrity. I don't think that's accurate.
I think you're underselling yourself.
I don't think that's accurate.
I'll tell you what I said when I was having lunch with Stutch. It's probably 2 years ago. Michael Stutchbury, who was the editor of the Fin, managing editor maybe at that time.
He's always been editor-in-chief.
Editor-in-chief.
Yep.
All these names, I don't know. The titles are beyond me. And we talked about a variety of things. And he was like, "You have many, many, many fans, but maybe no fan that was bigger than him of you." Like, he was loves everything about you and your writing.
I assure you, he does not love everything about it.
The legal
he was my boss
may be
for 12
less,
years.
supportive, but
there were moments, and there were lots of things about me that he didn't love.
And so he said to me, because he had known, I think I proudly told him that we had first met on this Financial Review Sunday program, and he said, "What's your take on Joe?" And this was my answer. You tell me what you think about this. It's kind, what I'm about to say. I said, "He is Australia's best investigative journalist masquerading as a bon vivant." That is what I said. Now, you're less bon vivant-y now, like you seem to have, but...
Well, we all grow up. Or some of us do.
But you had this amazing way when you wrote Rear Window of seeming completely fun and like a gossip columnist, but the stuff that you broke was the best investigative stuff, I thought, in Australia. Like, when did you decide that that's what you were going to do with that Rear Window column? Because it was just a gossip column before you got there.
It was never a decision, no. It wasn't like I had a flash of light and said, now I'm going to do it this way. We all evolve, and I was just lucky that I had this one platform with total creative freedom, and I was allowed to sit there in that same seat and just grow as a journalist and learn a lot. And the thing is, the work I did was not of great interest to people who are not interested in business. That's just... A lot of people would just read that and go, "That's all Greek to me. I've got no interest."
Well, that is the Financial Review.
Sure. But sure. And if you're interested in... if you are adjacent to the capital market in any way, or corporate Australia, then it was a unique product. And I very quickly started enjoying, even though I wrote more about politics at the start because that was part of where I'd come from, and I didn't have a great amount of knowledge or skill at covering the market. I understood corporates because I'd worked at a big company like Qantas, for instance, but I didn't understand the plumbing of the market and all of the things how that all works. Once I got further down the road there, it became clear to me that I think, with exceptions, business journalism tends to be more reverential of its subject matter than political journalism. Like, I don't think many CEOs would last 5 seconds as a member of parliament, because they just shit canned on a daily basis, and absolutely, I mean, we see it time and again. And so it was quite unique to have that same sort of fairly cynical approach to the words that were spilling from the mouths of CEOs in a business newspaper, which was just quite common in political journalism, but had never really been done that way. No, I wouldn't say never been done that way, but never been very successfully done.
Part of it is because you are the worst of it is the startup sector, but you are so reliant on being fed PR from these companies, and they know how to treat you well, that I think you're right. It's very reverential reporting, generally speaking.
Oh, definitely covering. Well, that's a whole other subject matter, the issue of technology journalism. But in the listed space, you can get access to decent information about companies, and most executives give fairly good access to the media, so they say lots of things that you can compare to what they're actually doing. So there's no sort of formula that the discrepancies between companies' words and their actions and executives' words and their actions, they just started to become like a code. I don't mean to sound like, I don't want to make this sound dramatic, but it is a bit like the Matrix, the green letters. And
Definitely agree.
Every day you get up and you're reading all the papers and you're getting through listening to all the interviews, and you just start to see words jump out at you, and you start to see patterns jump out at you, and you say, that person is not quite right.
Yeah. I think you can, when you look at a company's investor presentation, you can know everything about what that company is hiding based on the first 3 slides in their deck. Like when the numbers are not in those first 3 slides, you just go straight for the numbers. I felt like the turning point for Rear Window, I mean, I've read the Financial Review literally since I was 15 years old. I felt the turning point was maybe the Alex Melly stuff that you jumped on. I don't know if you felt similarly, or Adam, what you felt, but that to me was like, this story that no one had even conceived, that when I looked at, obviously he was the head of the CPA. When I looked at it, I assumed people in the CPA that were running it got paid $250K. That was my assumption. And you brought this whole thing to life that I think shocked everyone. Did it feel like a turning point, or was that just for me as a reader?
Well, I don't know that it felt like that at the time, because when you're in it, it's just happening. What was clear is that this guy was an emperor with no clothes, and he had, I don't have my usual lawyers clearing everything I say anymore, so I'm just
try dealing with Adam every week.
It was clear that he was someone who was projecting a grandiose vision of himself,
rather than running things for members' benefits.
Yes,
is how I would read it.
And he was using members' money to make himself, famous. And I was stunned by the number of people who were just raising it with me in general conversation. Who is that guy? And of course, because he'd been on the television show that we had, he paid a lot of money to be the naming sponsor of that show for one season, and therefore we had to have him on the panel all the time. A lot of people just kept saying, because he had these huge billboards at the airport that had a CPA Australia about that big and a huge thing of himself.
What did he call himself?
The Naked CEO.
The Naked CEO.
Which makes no sense either.
And by the way, that is not a good image.
No.
So it was.
And you basically, I don't want to say you brought him down, because that's true, that's in fact the less
exposed him.
the less consequential part of the story, because that's just one individual. You basically caused change to occur in that entire universe of stuff. Now, it didn't stick for that long, that change, obviously. And
well, I mean, they've changed the constitution of the CPA completely, so that you'll never be able to have another individual sort of capture the organisation and stack the board with their own friends, who then, make egregious decisions around his termination rights.
And getting paid millions of dollars a year.
Yeah, and a 3-year, upon termination, 3 years base salary as a termination payment. I mean, that if a listed company, that's not allowed in listed companies. Under the corporations law, it's maximum 1 year, and that was changed.
2011 or 10?
I think, good question. I think Chris Bowen was financial services minister, so that sounds about right. Yeah,
I think if there was no Rear Window, it's hard for me to imagine any other columnist, not the quality of journalist, but any other columnist having the space to go and do that type of thing over an extended period of time.
To give credit where it's due, that was the first time I ever worked in partnership with Ed Tadros at the AFR, who was at that time very new accounting reporter, and so it was the first time we ever did this thing where you sort of had Ed from the front of the book writing the straight story, and then me from the back of the book really throwing the eggs.
Yeah.
And you sort of squeeze the subject. So they're being pilloried and having the sort of conventional pressure put on them, and it becomes impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
And that's not something we didn't sort of systematically set out to repeat that, but it ended up being the way we worked many times. For instance, with Johnny Shapiro on Magellan.
Johnny's one of the great investigative journalists as well.
So him and I worked very closely on the Magellan thing, and the same thing happened. And Peter Kerr at the AFR on the Rio Tinto thing, and then again I was working closely with Ed and Neil on the PwC tax leak scandal, and that worked really well.
Yeah,
it feels like you started with a rogue in Alex Maley, and then you went on to, I think, the Blue Sky stuff, which was outstanding, and then you went on to, obviously there was a negative tale in that.
Yeah, I was about to say, my lawyers don't think it was that outstanding. But I mean, to be honest, before Alex Maley actually was Gary Halou at Murray Goulburn.
Of course.
And
I thought he was after.
He was before. And the other one, of course, was
we had Don Meij.
Vocation. The guys at Vocation.
Thor.
Thor, Mark Hutchison at Vocation. Yeah. So actually, Maley was not the first, but he was the biggest name at the time, yeah.
And you moved on to, I think that obviously Rio was a huge, and without you, I don't think the Rio thing would have happened. You were relentless on that. Everybody else had forgotten about it, and you just kept like.
Yeah, I was even getting emails from readers, which inevitably not everyone agrees. But I was starting to get readers from email like, "Why are you so obsessed with Rio Tinto?" I got the same thing on Magellan, and surprise, surprise, on Qantas. People say, "Oh, you're just obsessed." It's like, well, look, I recognise if people get fatigued with a campaign, I understand you can't please everyone, and it's a valid criticism, but I never sort of wrote columns where nothing new had happened. I think the story had to develop.
I would open I would always go and see what you wrote, and I actually would save and read it like later in the day because I wanted to like savour it for the day. But as soon as it was a Qantas article, I'd like get excited. So I think there was the.
Well, you do work in the travel sector.
No, but I think the numbers on Qantas are like 2x the average person reads a Qantas story.
100. So, that is absolutely right.
And we'll get to Qantas in a second. That's why you're here. But you moved on to obviously Rio and then Qantas, and now you've almost taken down a PM. Well,
he's not going to go down for this.
No, but I'm not saying he's not going to go down for this, but it's
chance.
Clearly damaged his reputation. It was already damaged for the last 6 months, and now this is almost feels like a mortal wound. This is the guy from the Housing Commission who built his reputation on being the everyman, and you've exposed him as getting $200,000 of effectively, you could argue, is soft bribery or hard bribery, depending on how you want to describe it.
You could argue.
I'll argue.
This is what I say to you when it's like recording with Adam.
Well, how is it not bribery?
Well, I think I'm not going to get out a legal dictionary, but I think I have not suggested, and never have suggested that there is causation between Anthony Albanese getting a lot of upgrades from Qantas or from Alan Joyce and a particular decision that he made. Yeah, I think there's a general sense of Albanese's closeness to Qantas. The upgrades is part of that story, but it's not the whole part of the story. You know, he's very proud of the deal he put. He sort of almost claims ownership of the Qantas Emirates partnership, and then causation over here. You look at the Qatar decision. Now, I'm not literally drawing a line from one to the other, but you do say Albo's really close to Qantas, has been for a long time. The government makes this inexplicable decision that only Qantas wanted, and the entire travel industry, state governments, every other airline was in favour of, and they block it.
And you say the government, but literally everyone in the government is saying it wasn't me. That's their defence, right?
Including Albanese, for that matter.
And so no one knows who's actually made this decision. Like no one's going on the record as saying that was my decision.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, but do we not?
Yeah,
know?
that's right. I've read the book.
Well, it feels like Catherine King herself wasn't capable of making this decition. So, who was the transport minister at the time?
Did you say it was like she wasn't capable? Did you say?
Yes.
Well, she was solely had the sole authority to make the decision. She expressed verbally that she was in favour of the decision. Her department recommended in favour of the decision. Other departments that her department consulted was in
recommended in favour of Qatar.
Yes, yeah, they were proceeding to negotiate into a mandate, which is a precursor to doing it. Other departments that her department had consulted with were in favour of the decision. Other members of cabinet were in favour of the decision, and suddenly in April, May of 2023, they start saying, we're very concerned about what happened at Hamad Airport in 2020, which was an incident which I'm not trying to defend in any way, but it was investigated. The officer was given a suspended jail sentence and sacked. There was a confidential report provided to the Morrison government. The Prime Minister held a press conference and said, "I've been briefed by the Qatari government. I'm satisfied with."
And this wasn't the airline. This was the police, which is different.
Correct.
You can argue in Qatar that there's a bit of
different arm of the government.
Well, the Federal Court of Australia ruled that it was fanciful that Qatar Airways had any control over the police officers at the airport on that day. So, or I mean, probably ever.
Full stop.
So quite clearly, this whole Hamad Airport incident was as awful as it was, just something that the Albanese government was reaching for as a viable excuse to block Qatar, and it wasn't a convincing one. And especially because then Catherine King came out and said, "Oh no, that's not the reason I blocked it." And then later she said, "Well, it wasn't the reason, but it was context."
Yeah.
And then she said, I did it because of decarbonisation. No, I didn't. I did it for Australian jobs. No, I didn't. I did it because we want to be able to evacuate Australians from war zones. She's all over the place.
You've been in politics. Like, at what point did they say, we don't think she should be speaking anymore? Like, why did no one say, don't let her speak anymore?
Nobody else wanted to speak.
I don't know the answer to that, but I did make the observation in the book that I thought Michael McCormack was almost incapable of speaking himself, and he was the predecessor minister who, by the way, Qantas successfully lobbied to block Qatar before that. So in 2018, Qatar tried to launch just one more daily flight to Brisbane, and Qantas came in and convinced the Morrison government. They pushed it out, and that was only approved right before before the election in 2022.
I'd be for me to defend the Morrison government, which was probably the worst government in Australian history. But I think it's quite different. It was
right up there.
It's quite different.
Adam likes extremes. If you haven't caught on.
But I mean, that one was
competitive.
Nobody's weeping for its demise. I don't think.
If you look at 2018,
and I'm supposed to be a Liberal stooge, but
Bruce Baird. But Emirates were flying a lot more. It was pre-COVID. Then we had, if you look at when the Qatar decision was made, you had Emirates were down to sort of 50% of what they were flying before. SQ weren't back to capacity. Qantas is 60% of what they were flying.
Yeah, and they were sort of flagging that they would be stuck at a peak of 80-something percent right out to. Because still today, they mothballed these A380s 4.5 years ago, and the two of them are still not back.
Yeah, so it's quite a different environment when you had sky high airfares. So, not to defend McCormack, but it was a very different set of paradigm when King/Albo made that call versus.
It was a more offensive decision, but I'm just pointing out that this is like both sides of politics have been doing what Qantas wants for a long time, and if anyone reads the book properly, it's not just Albanese hit job. It just isn't, and nobody who looks at all the stuff about what the Morrison government did in relation to Qantas can possibly reach that conclusion.
Adam and I disagree about bribery. Basically, like I think. You can't put cash in a paper. You can't put cash in a paper bag. That's bribery. When I look at this and I read the book, this to me is. By the way, I don't think it's proper. I just think this is relationship cultivation, and there are many arms to it, and no one action leads directly to an outcome. It is about cultivating relationships over a long period of time.
That's what makes it more insidious.
Yes, and so that you never know. It's not obvious that it's causal, and it may, and no one can claim that it's causal, and so I think
is why people just gorge themselves on it, because they know that you can't prove that just because. Look at this laundry list of free upgrades I've got over the years, as you say, worth tens of thousands of dollars. You can't connect that and that, and nor should we probably.
But is it less insidious in corporate? Because this, so first, I would say these two things. There's so much to say about this book, but like firstly, the fact that all this focus is on Albo and his stuff. I'm going to ask you, like Alan Joyce, he thought this book was going to be all about him. He went and got, by what I read in the paper, he got like PR and comms people to protect him from this. Mm-hmm. He kind of has been largely overlooked in a lot of in this book. But the second thing I'd say is...
Well, not in this book, in the
media about this book. Like he's probably like a societal relief. But the thing is this, the other thing no one talks about is the fact that most of the Qantas Chairman's Lounge is corporate.
Yes.
And so we talk about politicians getting these like soft benefits, but if I'm running a company and I want to sell to an enterprise, and the person in the enterprise responsible for buying says you need to make a payment to me in order for me to buy, like one is I think I might be in South America, but like we can't do that. Like that's bribery and illegal.
Well, you're blaming the procurement officer there, but actually, let me tell you how it really happens.
Yeah.
The procurement officer, who is always under pressure to achieve savings, goes to their superior and says, "I've just managed to extract $15 million a year in savings." Oh, that's an exaggeration. $2 million a year in savings from our travel. All we need to do, I've gone to tender, and we just need to switch to Virgin.
Yeah.
And that decision goes all the way up, tick, 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 until it gets to the CEO or the board or the CFO, and they go, absolutely not. Because they're all members of the Chairman's Lounge.
Yep.
So it's actually, you've got it in the reverse.
So we talk about politicians, but to me, like we just make a broader decision about like,
but hang on. I've got
it.
no issue with individuals contracting on whatever terms they want. That's up to shareholders. The issue I have is with politicians because they're supposed to be representing us.
I agree.
It's their job to keep Qantas in line, which is supposed to be a highly regulated company. And the whole point of this book is to outline all of the ways in which Canberra failed to keep Qantas in line.
That's a good point.
I think if you look at the upgrade, why the upgrades are so insane, and you talked about it in the book, there's two types of upgrades. There's a sort of at the gate upgrade, and there's a confirmed upgrade, which almost
or space positive. It's got different names in the industry.
The confirmed upgrade almost never happens. Like it's. I'm not sure if Bridget McKenzie, who talked about her upgrades this week, got them, but I don't. You obviously were in Qantas. How often does the confirmed upgrade ever happen?
Well, it never happens at my level, I can assure you, because I was quite junior. But my whole point, well, not my whole point, but one of the points that I make and have tried to make clear is that only the CEO of Qantas can issue a confirmed upgrade. That is not, this ticket holder will go to the airport with a neck pillow and their fingers crossed. That is, they will receive a new ticket. They'll buy an economy ticket, and long before the day of travel, the system will email them a new ticket that doesn't say economy. It says business. It's a new ticket.
Which is actual cash. It's really actual cash because they would have sold that for sure.
It is in kind. It is cash in kind.
And getting the CEO of Qantas to engage. I mean, you have an incident in the book where John Mullen, now chairman of Qantas, when he was running the Asian ops of DHL, couldn't get a scheduled meeting to happen with the Qantas CEO.
Well,
so getting the Qantas CEO's attention is not like an everyday occurrence.
I don't know, not when it comes to politicians. And again, this is not just an Alan Joyce thing. This is a Jeff Dixon, Margaret Jackson, Richard Goyder, whoever they are. But Alan was very good at cultivating politicians, and he learned from the best. Who was Jeff Dixon, who I worked for. Jeff Dixon was one of the great lobbyists, and between them, Margaret Jackson and Jeff Dixon were unbelievable. And they blocked Singapore from getting on the Pacific route in 2007 and 2006. So I don't think it's right that it's hard to get the CEO of Qantas' attention if you're the Transport Minister of Australia,
I get
or
it.
the shadow Transport Minister of Australia, or frankly any member of cabinet, because Qantas devotes a large amount of resources, a big team of very well plugged in people who who wander the corridors of Parliament House, up and down the corridors, dropping in on people, saying, "Hi, how are you? Anything I can do? Nothing's too much." That's the way it's been going on for decades.
I've often thought if one day I go into politics and make that horrendous decision, there is no way that I'll fly business class travelling around Australia. I think first. There's no first in Australia.
No, ExecuJet.
Every politician, like the number one, I mean, you make the point about interacting with normal human beings when you're at the top of business. I mean, every politician so quickly can lose touch with reality. If they haven't already before they go into politics, they're sitting in Canberra, they're driven around everywhere. I think one of the very few opportunities they have to actually interact with human beings is to travel in economy and sit next to some of them. I mean, you can hold me to this.
We'll be holding to this.
There is no way that I will use taxpayers' money to fly business domestically if I was in politics. No way. I think it's totally wrong.
Is this a serious prospect?
It's not impossible. It's not impossible. Can I ask you a businessy kind of question, which I think, we talk a lot about strategy on this podcast. One of the interesting things you talked about was Qantas's decision in the middle of COVID when the government was thinking about extending money to Virgin. And my view on business is always it is better to have a weak competitor than a dead competitor because dead competitors create a vacuum for a better competitor to come.
Absolutely.
Qantas pretty clearly made a decision to try to, we can't say kill Virgin because the truth is most business failure is like suicide, not homicide. And Virgin had made bad decisions for a long time.
Virgin was nearly dead. I mean, as I point out, that before COVID happened, they were effectively insolvent.
But
their operating cash was only barely above the interest on their debt.
I read that. And so I thought that was very interesting. And like when you go through this whole process and you look at this, do you think Qantas would be in a better position domestically today if they would have let Virgin get that money? And obviously they would have gotten some money as well, so more profits. Like that would have been good for them, taxpayer funded profitability. Like, do you think strategically that was the wrong decision for them to make?
Yeah, and in the chapter that I wrote this, I was careful not to be too declarative on either way because I'm not 100% sure about this because I mean it's impossible to know the counterfactual.
Yeah, that's right.
Potentially Virgin got $1 billion or $1.5 billion, limped along, and then fell over anyway. And so, as you say, Qantas would have got more money, but instead Qantas got a much more commercially logical is not the word.
We could say like commercially rational.
Rational is the word I'm going for. Yeah. Exactly. Sorry. Thank you. They got a much more rational competitor in Bain, and any of those private equity owners that would have bought Virgin.
And they got Jane Hardlicker. I don't want to compete with her.
No. Yeah. So I have not been all of that complimentary about Jane Hardlicker over the years either, but I think Virgin made some pretty big strategic mistakes under the ownership of Bain. One of which was moving into the middle of the market and deciding blindly that, oh no, the top end of the market, too many costs and frills, let's just simplify. And very quickly they lost all of their corporate accounts. And the other thing is they dropped the ball in the SME sector. They've lost massive amounts of market share in the SME space to Qantas. And so they sort of still have all the same lounges and they still have the business class seats and the business class catering and all of the same costs. They've reduced them at the margins, but they don't have the same number of customers.
The lounges are dreadful, the Virgin lounges, I have to say. Like they were under Borghetti, you could see that guy wanted to prove that he could actually take on Qantas head to head, which maybe wasn't the right.
Well, I mean, I think the Virgin lounges under John Borghetti were too nice. I think,
they were like
rationally,
nice.
if you look at their accounts, I think their costs were just too high.
Yeah.
So it's so. Like Virgin has got 33% of the market share, but they're only getting sort of 20% of the profit. So it's going to be very hard to close that gap when you don't have the loyalty scheme is a big driver of it, but effectively the yield on that corporate traffic is the really hard thing to do. So I guess there's a really long way of saying maybe Qantas could have feared that Virgin would have been an even better competitor than it has been in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is not unfair. I think your point on...
I think it's quite hard to work for the private equity as well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that... I'm certainly not saying that Jane Hardlicker or her management team is perfect, but I think that they don't want to invest.
What a really interesting contrast.
That's right. Well, by the way, like working for PE, there's a multitude of different ways that PE operate, but generally there's a high degree of brutality that's involved as a management team.
You leverage the thing and you don't spend, and that makes it hard to compete because this is part of Qantas's problem. But it's Qantas can get away with disinvesting in its business as it has since 2013-14, especially when their competitor is now doing the same thing. They're not getting any new aircraft. I mean, the 737 MAX delays have obviously contributed to that, but largely they're not investing in technology or product like a normal non-PE competitor would.
Yeah, I think your point on Virgin is really interesting. And this is to make you, because you mentioned in the book you're a better member of the Beyond Lounge for 5 or 6 years.
That's why I looked at you when you said the Virgin Lounge are terrible. I was like, oh, it's not that bad.
Joe's been a normal lounge for a while, but, which I thought was a really interesting contrast. So you're pretty critical of Jane, probably almost as critical of Jane as you're of Alan in some point, and yet Virgin didn't take away your Beyond membership. They were obviously, respect to Jane, pretty humble in accepting that criticism, whereas famously, and this is well covered in the book, one of the biggest missteps Alan probably ever did was take the AFR out of the Chairman's Lounge, which just seemed like just the most ridiculous decision. Is that a really good allegory of the contrast between Virgin and Qantas?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't suggest that Jane accepted with perfectly good grace any of my criticisms. I mean, they were pretty savage. None of which I really resile from. Particularly all that stuff around, Virgin's, Bain's really good long-term PR, and we're different to normal private equity-run businesses. And look, I think John Borghetti gave me a lounge membership when I was living in LA, like 2018. So then I lived there. Then COVID happened. They shut the lounge. I hadn't really even been there until last year or the year before, and I don't fly that often, and I don't go there very often. But when I have gone there, I can see the appeal. Particularly not so much, oh wow, it's so fancy. It's who you run into, especially as a journalist and you're in the information business. It's very valuable. So I definitely wanted to declare that up front and not try to be cute about that. I've never been offered the Chairman's Lounge membership. Don't think I will be, and I think it'll be a bit difficult for me to accept
Hard
it.
to accept it now.
Correct. But I also can definitely look straight into the camera and point to my record of coverage of Virgin and say very confidently that has not affected anything.
I think you should definitely be offered, like John or Vanessa should definitely offer you the Chairman's Lounge membership, and you should take it, and you should keep writing about Qantas. Isn't that the ultimate demonstration from Qantas of a preparedness to be critically analysed? That it would be the ultimate move by them. Absolutely, they should do
It's
it.
a baller move.
I mean, well,
baller move.
Yeah. My views are positive, very positive views on John Mullen, as Joe's are. That's the kind of thing he could do to demonstrate that it's a new era. Do you think the chairman chooses?
I would
CEO
suspect
chooses?
that there are more important things that Qantas could do to demonstrate that it's a new era than give me a Chairman's Lounge
You think it's
membership.
a-
People working on PR. For
Is it
this book,
the chairman or the CEO that chooses the Qantas Lounge?
Technically, it's the CEO, but it depends on the sort of interest of the chairman and the extent to which their authority holds sway. Like I think Lee Clifford would have had a thing to say about certain people being in or out. Richard Goyder, I don't know as much, but it's called the Chairman's Lounge.
Yeah.
Inevitably, I don't think if the Qantas chairman has a view on someone being in or out, that it is disregarded.
Yeah.
I thought it was the Chairman's Lounge, as in chairman, the client, the customer's a chairman, rather than the chairman chooses. It's
But
really
wouldn't then it be MEN?
Yeah, that's true.
I think you've given it much more thought than they did at the time, to be honest with you.
I actually realised that, and you talked about that, Ansett were the first to come up with this concept.
the
of
Manager's Lounge, yeah.
There was one area.
They obviously didn't give a lot of thought to the name. That's a horrible name.
I know. These are the days where you used to have people running around in their business shirts with short sleeves and ties on.
Yeah, bus driver style.
You can just imagine everyone in there, their cigarettes.
There was one area, I think there's one part of the book, and your columns I actually disagree with. I'd love to get your take on it. And this is the TWU stuff. And there was a big part of the book, and they illegally sacked 1,700 workers. I think, and this is my take on it, and this is probably where we may be slightly different views, but when we talk about illegal sackings, and no one's doubting the technical legality because it went to the High Court, 7 love. So it was,
11 judges to
11
0
judges.
said it was illegal.
When you look at illegal, you can go and murder somebody or you rape somebody. That's very clearly illegal. And I think where we draw the line here, this is an illegal sense in industrial relations law is very technical, and it's made by the government of the day. And the Liberal Party has you worked on work choices at Bruce.
I did.
So you go from work choices to Labor bringing in the Workplace Relations Act. So it wasn't a 10 Commandments illegality. It was a technical industrial relations law that was breached. But let me go to the deeper point. The deeper point is I don't think Qantas customers, the Australian public, really cared about baggage handlers. They cared about
they
what
cared about
happens
their
to
bags
them.
turning up.
They cared about what happens. Yeah, but Swissport does it now and the bag's coming fine.
Well,
So,
they are now, but they certainly weren't in 2022.
But they were doing other airlines at the time. It's not as if it's not, Qantas
Yeah, but that's why Qantas bags were so late, because they were relying on baggage handlers that were doing 15 other airlines for the first time in their history.
But Adam's point is kind of right, which is the public was frustrated by their bags not turning up.
Yep.
But I don't think the technicalities of this, I'm not necessarily agreeing with his wider view, but I don't think the technicalities of why this was illegal or whether it was illegal resonated with the public.
Okay, well, let me deal with that in two ways. The first is you describe it as sort of this technical thing,
Well,
and that's certainly what Qantas, that's the rendition that Qantas falls back upon. The fact is, it was Qantas's job under the Act to demonstrate that they did not sack their employees to stop them from exercising their rights to strike when their EBA opened several weeks later. like it was about to open several weeks later. Now, Qantas the documents that were discovered in court showed managers writing in the notes of a presentation to Alan Joyce and all of his direct reports, the GMC. EBA open, Labor government incoming. Like the reasons were very, very clearly, let's get rid of these motherfuckers before we have them on strike, and Labor's in power, and who knows what happens. So
I'm not denying that, but I'm saying
that's not a technicality.
The public don't want them to strike.
Public don't want disruption, but the right to strike during a bargaining period is like a basic fundamental right of an employee's collective agreement. And I'm a liberal stooge, and I believe in that. Right? I'm not saying that they should be able to go on wildcat strikes. That should be punished, but when they're in a negotiating period, that is their leverage, and they're entitled to it. The thing is, those people had worked there for a very long time. Baggage handlers at Qantas, that was a lifelong career. People got that job. They were there for 20, 25 years.
Do you know what they get paid, baggage handlers?
I don't know exactly. No, I couldn't tell you.
More than the current people get paid. The answer.
Yes, absolutely. Although, those costs exploded, and I'm not after the labour shortage, and I think that. But anyway, that's a different story. The other point I would make is that it isn't true that this didn't resonate with the Australian public. In the Roy Morgan and RepTrak research, the consumer research that was all out there in 2022 when Richard Goyder was ignoring the outcry and saying that Alan Joyce was the best CEO in Australia, that research showed that one of the driving reasons for Qantas's brand collapse was that respondents were saying that they didn't like the way Qantas treated their employees. And bear in mind, Qantas was in receipt of JobKeeper for those people. That's another thing. So they take all these subsidies in order to keep people connected with the company through COVID, and then they sack them.
I'm surprised that you're arguing this because you're kind of like Robin Hood, basically, and like all of a sudden you've flipped on this, and you're
and as you get to the last chapter of the book, it comes out that there's all these documents showing that Qantas had these meetings at the time, going, oh, this is going to be challenging court. This is a bit shaky. Maybe what if we say the reasons are this, and what if we say the reasons are that? And like they're road testing the reasons,
which kind of appeared for sentencing, but not for the trial. Those documents,
yeah. And the judge was furious that he only learned about this after he'd come.
And the judge is often furious in prose, right?
Yeah, he is. But my point is, Qantas knew what it was doing. Yeah. Was dubious.
I'm not denying any of that.
I don't think you should prosecute this argument. No, but you should concede.
Can I just draw so in 2011-12, Alan Joyce famously grounded the airline. And that was for a period of time, the public hated him. He was public enemy number one.
Yes.
This is back Joyce 1.0.
I was totally supportive of him at that time. Yeah, presumably you were as well.
I had no view at the time. Okay. But within probably 4 years, he was to the Australian Financial Review CEO of the Year. He was loved, but he was
Order of the highest echelon of the Order of Australia.
Well, Daniel Andrews also gets that, so let's keep that in perspective.
But Alan Joyce for a period was loved. So the Australian public, I think, forgave that first grounding because yes, he took an axe to the court, to the pilot, to all the staff, but he did it because he had interest. Inverted commas, interests of the public, and he was trying to bring down fares.
And this is an argument I make, though. I mean, very clearly at that time in 2011, he had 3 unions trying to go on strike at the same time, and that was that is just chaos. And he certainly was very aggressive, but I think many people, even on the left-leaning side of politics, would acknowledge that was necessary. And what he did by doing it was reset the industrial landscape and was able to suppress wages at the level of inflation or even slightly lower in Qantas for that whole next decade. And that was incredibly important in getting Qantas into financially good shape. But the thing is, and I defend him on all of that in the book, I think where you cross into law breaking and aggression that is just beyond the pale, especially when, of course, if you read this chapter, Qantas's long-standing industrial relations advisor, Ian Oldmeadow, he'd been their IR expert for 30 years, great character, was warning, do not do this. Do not do this. Exactly. It's high risk. It's going to be a debacle. And he was saying it in very fruity language. No one was under any sort of
misapprehension
about what he really thought. And Joyce, who, by the way, is very close to Ian Oldmeadow, disregarded him and listened to hardliners instead. And what happened is what happened.
No one's denying any of that. Well, I'll jump to the commercials in a second, but I think I'm not sure the Australian public has the same affection for, like, there's some amazing Qantas staff, like any business, and there's there's that old school Qantas hostess or host that knocks you as you go past and has a go. You feel like you're almost a prisoner when you're on a Qantas flight sometimes because the way the staff treat you.
I think it depends where you're sitting.
Yeah, it does. Not so much for Adir, but if you look at compared to SQ, compared to Emirates, the service is night and day. So I don't think there's any great affection from the Australian public. What I think annoyed the Australian public was A, all the Qantas execs started getting huge salaries, and B, moreover, flight costs were going through the roof. So I think if you look at Joyce 1.0, he was doing it inverted commas for a bit for the public, obviously help Qantas shareholders and help execs.
It is scary to fight 3 unions at once. I once got an inside look from Chris Corrigan and his team of what it was like to fight the Maritime Union, which obviously is scarier than, but it's not a pleasant experience to fight unions, especially 3 at once. So I think, I wouldn't like.
I think we all agree on that. It's more this. I think the second. I'm just not sure that the TWU illegal sackings was the problem. The problem was what happened after that.
Well, I think
it was the raising fares.
I think you're wrong about everything here. Like
it was all part. It was all part of the loss of faith. The full court of the federal court delivered a judgment that was so watertight in its defence of Justice Lee's original judgment. It sort of said Justice Lee is impossible to gainsay. And then before they'd even had time to read that judgment of the full court, they announced they were appealing to the High Court. And so I think when you've got real individuals here who've worked for Qantas for 25 years, they've all been thrown on the scrap heap, given redundancies, but many of them haven't worked again. At that point, if they had said, okay, we got it wrong, we're paying compensation and we're paying it now, it would have been a very different story. But it was just, what this does is typify the Alan Joyce fight at all costs and I'm never wrong mindset that drove Qantas into the wall.
I thought that was bizarre that it got fought to the High Court, but I think much more bizarre and totally against what I'd expected is that when Vanessa Hudson came in and they still had this outstanding ghost flights issue, I was certain that would be settled almost immediately when she came in, and then she makes this bundle of rights defence, which, don't you think, it reminded me of Basket of Deplorables. It sounds the same and it shows the same total disconnection with the public as human beings. Yeah. Like, didn't you find that totally astonishing that they didn't instantly settle that claim when she came in, clear the decks?
I think Vanessa Hudson's first few months were horrible as CEO. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons. Yeah.
But maybe bad advice from people that had been an overhang with her from the previous administration.
She took too long to get rid of people who were Joyce's people. There's no doubt about that.
I thought your line, which was basically the right decision made a year late is the wrong decision. Yes. Hopefully I quote that roughly correctly. Yes. I think that's the right line. It's not as good as the best line you've ever had with this Qantas stuff, which is the Yes 23 line, which I don't dare to quote, but that it was like the answer to 2 questions. Like, you should finish off that quote because...
would you like a chairman's lounge membership for your son, and how old is he?
I mean, is that not the greatest? That is one of the greatest. I just am reading a book, The Making of Mark Twain, who was obviously called Sam Clemens, not Mark Twain. I wait till we're a bit into this interview so you don't feel like I'm in favour of flattery, because I'm definitely not. But when I read your work, there are just some snippets of a bit of the Mark Twain turn of phrase in some of your writing. So you should take that as a big compliment and not respond to it.
I'm embarrassed again.
Yeah. Talking about Vanessa Hudson, I think there's an argument. Take out the first few months of her reign, but she's basically turned over Andrew Finch, who was obviously a real problem, turned over the PR guy, the other Andrew.
The other Andrew after that, Andrew Parker, the previous government guy. So there's another of the
Andrew Glantz, who's actually really good. I think a really good exec, is now running Loyalty. But I think there's an argument that she's actually done a pretty good job in the first year. Certainly a big about face from what we saw.
It was a low bar.
Yeah, absolutely. But I flying Qantas now doesn't seem that different to what was pre-COVID. Like they seem to be on time. Lounge is probably a bit worse than they used to be. The
aircraft are a lot older.
I don't think the aircraft... the Wi-Fi works a lot better than Virgin's Wi-Fi. I actually don't...
But are you talking domestic?
Yeah, I was about to say, they don't even have international Wi-Fi.
Qantas international, because you can't redeem points. Yeah. But domestically, I think they're doing a pretty... And certainly miles above the US domestic carriers. It's like night and day.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I've flown US domestic carriers a lot.
Really?
And I think they're much better.
I hate US domestic carriers.
Their fleets are younger.
Delta One?
Their technology is superb.
Delta, you're flying business, you can't get into a lounge.
No, hang on. Delta One is a suite with doors. Delta One business is a suite with doors.
Domestic flight.
Yes.
No, domestic. Absolutely on domestic. Certainly on Transcon. And the thing where they really stand out versus Qantas is on technology. And for instance, when 2022 melted down and the phones melted down and the airport terminals were full of people going, one of the reasons was because when you cancel all these flights, people go on the Qantas app and they can't do anything.
Yeah.
Right? If you go, in 2021, Delta introduced same-day flight change in-app. So if Delta cancels your flight, you just go into the app and go, there'll be 7 flights to choose from and you choose one, choose your seat and it's done.
Absolutely.
Because Delta invests billions in technology and United is right behind them as well. America is a bit of a laggard. But like the technology disinvestment in Qantas is really a big part of its problems as well, its operational problems as well. I mean, it's also why the ghost flights thing even happened. Their systems were not capable of the mass cancellation and reassignment of tickets into new flights because they have this, everything's based on Amadeus, but all of the other bolt-on things are 100 years old. Yep. And of course, when in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, Qantas's CapEx framework was just basically, can we see the return on that? No, not doing it.
Yeah.
Plus, Qantas is, you might not feel this, Joe, but like Qantas is very Sydney-centric as an airline. And so when I was flying overseas in a class that wasn't economy and I had to transfer through Sydney, I just joined the same line as everybody in economy and had that same horrible experience transferring. And it's like everyone, in the bus and then the line to recheck stuff. And like basically they just didn't realise that somebody might be coming from outside Sydney, and that was at the end. That was the end days of Ellen Joyce, and I will say that because I'm always trying to be very polite to other human beings, and I was very polite to their staff, and they said to me, "We cannot wait for the new CEO to take over this company." It was in the last few months, like after the announcement, and so it was pretty clear to me that everyone at the customer-facing staff, they were desperate for cultural change in the organisation.
So can I get a view from you? How is Vanessa been going? She's been a year or so in the job. Have you seen a market improve? Do you agree with my contention, or is it?
Yeah, look, I think she's done. She's picked low-hanging fruit. She is, I think, got a lot more natural empathy for customers and for staff. Much more open to negative feedback. Like generally out there on the shop floor, meeting with people.
Do you ever fly economy between destinations?
She does.
I mean, that's important, I think.
I think she does. Day she didn't she? Wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was more of a stunt, but more quietly it happens.
Yeah.
I don't get me wrong. I don't think she's flying to London in economy or anything like that, and nor should she. But I think domestically she does fly economy a fair bit. Vanessa's also it's also about what Vanessa's inheriting, and she's got one hand tied, maybe she's got two hands tied behind her back because she's inheriting, her inheritance is partly of her own design. And she was the CFO, promoting the sort of...
Briefly though, she wasn't CFO for long.
Well, she was CFO for 4 years.
But that was all pretty much COVID.
Well, that's a pretty relevant period.
I know, but that wasn't the malinvestment in airlines came before her. In metal came before her.
It began before her, it continued under her.
But you can't be investing in metal during COVID when you... Was any airline investing in new planes at that point?
I'm not suggesting that they should have been ordering new planes or taking delivery of new planes in 2020 or 2021. They weren't taking delivery of any new planes in 2019 or 2018 or 2017.
I'm saying that wasn't her. That was Tino or whoever it was.
Sure. But put it this way. She is absolutely not conceding that they are that they have invested insufficiently in the fleet. She's still running the line, which is Alan Joyce's line, that absolutely they were investing and it's at an appropriate level, which is, I think, a pity because my experience, I think Vanessa is unnecessarily unwilling to accept things that are blindingly obvious in order to avoid a perceived admission of weakness or guilt, and one of them is on CapEx. Like Alan Joyce inherited a fleet that was 8 years old, and he left her a fleet that is 16 years old, and that's an average age. So there are many aircraft that are well into their 20s, and the key ones, of course, is the domestic 737s. There's 75 of them.
That was American Airlines. Why?
From when they went into Chapter 11 after 9/11, they picked up those 75 737s from American Airlines.
To replace 767s, weren't they? Had a lot of 767s that were flying, and they reduced the size. And
the domestic strategy used to be different. They had a lot of wide body flights and fewer flights, and they decided to simplify, have more regular flights. But
I love those wide body domestic.
Yeah. But they took a long time to board and blah blah blah. So, but the fact, my point is, they were ordered. They took those flights, and they didn't all arrive in 2001. But the order happened 23 years ago, and a lot of those aircraft are in their 20s. And there's 75 of them, and they've ordered to replace them 28 A321 XLRs. Now, they're 10% bigger, so let's call it like apples for apples. Let's call it 32. Right? Yeah. That's less than half of the number that they need of firm orders. And they're not going to, those 32 aren't even going to be delivered until 2028 or 2029.
And you can't really add the 10% because they want frequency, right? That's what they want between. They don't want to lose those slots.
Well, no, you've got to judge it by by seat capacity. But even whether or not you count it that way or you don't count it, they haven't ordered enough. And by the end of this decade, they're still going to have these ridiculously old 737s flying around. Now, why are they able to do that?
Adam
because of the lack of competition.
You liked them because Wi-Fi. You got the Wi-Fi on them. That's what you liked them.
What do you think? The new aircraft won't have Wi-Fi?
I know. That's his whole pitch with Qantas to me all the time, the Wi-Fi.
What's better?
I'm like, I get Wi-Fi on Virgin. Rex had no Wi-Fi. I tried to fly Rex as much as I could between Melbourne and Sydney.
The other fleet that's a problem is the A330 fleet, and that's the backbone of their Asia fleet. Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong.
I don't like those planes.
And of course, flights from the East Coast to Perth.
Yeah,
those again are in their 20s, and they just made an order to replace them that doesn't start arriving. The first one won't arrive till 2027. So these things are flying into the 2030s. They're already held together by sticky tape. No Wi-Fi on any of their international flights. And by the way, I mean, Singapore Airlines, Emirates, Delta, 2014 they had Wi-Fi. It's 10 years ago. So Qantas, and the thing is they can afford to have shit old planes in domestic because Virgin has shit old planes and Virgin's owned by private equity and they're not going to buy new ones any more than they have to. On international, they're competing, to the east with the US carriers. They're investing big in fleet. But to the west, it's much worse. You're competing with JAL, ANA, Qatar, Cathay, Singapore, Emirates. Well, they're not competing with Emirates, but airlines of really seriously high quality. And if people get a taste of them, I think it then gets hard to say, oh, no, I'm going to stick in this frequent flyer program where my points can't be used when I could fly for cheaper and better on all of these other airlines.
But people, I think that's a great point, but people... and we've said this a lot, 80% of Australians sweep their points straight to Qantas, even though it's, as we know, this isn't even Qantas' fault. It's very hard to
it's part of Qantas' genius. They should be clapped for being able to get away with it.
Australians, we talk about power of brand as the key competitive advantage, and one thing Adir talks about is one thing a really strong brand gives you is the ability to stuff something up and people still forgive you for it. And the Australian public just forgives.
Well, that's actually the sign of a monopoly.
Well, it's also that.
But Nike's just done that. They're not a monopoly and they get a second chance, right? People are still buying Nikes even though it's a disaster. So a monopoly, you never have to fix it. At least a brand in a competitive market, you get a second chance to fix it.
Yeah, but are we saying that Qantas is fixing it? I think that's the issue. Is Qantas fixing it? I think they're trying to appear to fix it. They're fixing some of it. There's lots of things that they calculate we don't need to fix it.
I think you're going to say the brand gives you pricing power because
it clearly does.
It clearly does, and I think that more of a more apt comparison, I should say, would be the switching costs of moving from the Apple ecosystem into the Google one. So many people just go too hard.
Yeah,
and it's called a fallacy for a reason as well, the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah,
I'd be giving up too much to switch. You think that. You actually wouldn't be, but you never do.
Well, that's the beauty of status credits because that's where they create the switching costs. If I'm Platinum or you're Platinum 1, you don't want to lose Platinum 1 because Platinum 1 is a genuine benefit.
I know. Tell me about it. I mean, geez, and keeping it is exhausting.
You wrote the book and you're still...
it's embarrassing. I mean, Jesus.
Can I just digress slightly?
Can I ask a Rex question? No one ever talks about Rex. I loved Rex. Rex... percentage homicide versus suicide. I mean, you wrote about them briefly in the book and Qantas caused them some problems, but they made horrible decisions. And
I think you've got to say 75, 80% suicide.
Yeah, agree. It always felt too good to be true. By the way, when they went broke and I was lamenting it on the podcast and online, nobody even knew they flew those capital city routes. Like the marketing was terrible. And
you mentioned this in the book. I thought it was such a great point, and I've talked about it a few times on the show, but nobody else ever talks about it. God knows why. And you talked about when Richard Goyder was trying to recruit Gill's replacement at AFL, and he was just trying to parachute in Kylie Watson-Wheeler, who was head of Disney. And you made the great point that if you're head of Google or Facebook or any of these businesses in Australia, you're effectively a head of sales. You're not a CEO
you're like a regional sales or marketing manager.
If that, because usually they're semi-monopolies anyway. So how is it nobody else picks this up? Why are you the only person to have really noted this? And
Noted that the heads of Australian technology
exactly.
companies. I don't think I am. I think many of the people around the AFL picked this up at the time too and went, hang on, I think let's have a closer look here. As I said, I mean no ill will or disrespect to Kylie Watson-Wheeler. I'm sure she's good at what she does.
Absolutely.
But she was just not in the same league for that position as the other candidates who had direct experience of running football clubs, running big parts of the AFL itself, or both. She's never worked directly in sports management. So the idea that because she's the head of a local Disney sales office that has a bit of Disney on Ice and a bit of merchandising thrown in as well, it's just not the same. But yeah, I've pointed to other examples in there as well where
Malik Hannigan was a big one who now is pretty senior at
ANZ. Jason Pellegrino, who
quit Domain or just got moved on from Domain.
I mean, his performance at Domain was absolutely abysmal.
Yeah.
And I am shocked at my former employer for allowing that business to wilt on the vine for as long as it did. It's sort of impossible to explain. You might leave someone there underperforming for 2 years, 3 years, but he was there for 6 years.
Yeah.
While REA Group just lapped Domain again. And if you look at what they were both respectively worth when he took over.
Wasn't that different?
It was 3 times, and now it's like, what is it, 15 times?
We talk about that quite a lot on the podcast.
It's shocking.
I think it's like 30
And Nine was the majority shareholder.
Yeah.
They had Nick Falloon, the chairman. I don't know how you defend his
Well, if you look at
performance.
Nine's share, we've always said, we talk about Mike a lot on the show, and look at Nine's share price drop across Mike's tenure. It's pretty much just a drop in the value of Domain.
Yeah.
Like the rest of the business kind of treaded water, whatever, it was fine. And Domain just dropped a couple of $1.5 billion, and that's the drop in the market cap of Nine.
Totally. And that's what Nine was buying when they bought Fairfax. They weren't buying the newspapers.
Oh, Stan as well, half a Stan.
Sure, they already owned half of that. They owned 0% of Domain.
Yeah.
That's what they were going for.
Yeah.
That was their growth asset, and it has not grown. It's gone in relative terms. It has shrunk.
You can even argue it's still overpriced because it doesn't make much money if at all.
And is it in a death spiral now? Is it too late? Look, I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, maybe I failed the independence test by not getting onto this when I was at Rear Window, but I was distracted by many other things.
I want to ask you a personal question. You won't get asked this on any other podcast or interview.
Here goes.
So you were in politics, then you were in corporate. You could have stayed in corporate. Rumour has it you were the highest paid journalist, well, definitely at the Fin, probably at Nine, and maybe highest paid print journalist in Australia. But whatever that was, you could have made more
it's
money.
not saying much,
You
by the way.
you could have made, I heard you were getting paid 7 figures. So you could have made more money. You could have really excelled dramatically in corporate life, but you chose to leave that and go into this world which had not been your background, into like journalism, and then stay there and craft this career. And something is driving you, because this kind of, this need to, I'm going to even say expose dishonesty or underhanded dealings is obviously coming from somewhere inside you.
Like, maybe some deep insecurity.
Well, but what do you think's going on there? Like, why did you decide to leave this corporate world and end up landing for at least an extended period of time in this particular role?
Well, I mean, let's not rewrite history. I was a junior burger in the corporate
But everyone
world.
starts junior. Nobody comes in as a CEO.
But nobody with my disrespect for authority gets senior
that's
in
interesting.
corporate Australia.
Yep.
There was no way I was going anywhere with my absolute disrespect for bullshit.
Do you think that
and
came
corporate
from-
life is rife with bullshit?
And do you think that came from politics, or do you think it was created by your time in politics?
I'm not sure
Like, do you think
that it had anything to do with politics.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more just maybe the role models that I had, and the sort of the books that I love to read. And
What were they? What were the books you loved?
Look, I loved. I really read mostly fiction, and a lot of the writers that I read, from 19th century like French nihilists right through to Norman Mailer.
That's serious stuff.
And right through to the Brat Pack of the 80s in New York, like Bret Easton Ellis and Jay McInerney. I just I was never going to be turn up and nod and smile and be obedient. It just, unfortunately, that chip was missing when I was made. And I sat next to, at Qantas, Lucinda Holdforth, who was Jeff Dixon's and Margaret Jackson's speechwriter, and had just recently taken over as Lee Clifford and Alan Joyce's speechwriter. And she was a great influence on me, and she introduced me to a whole new legion of books and parts of the literary canon that only made it worse. And we've remained good friends, and she's a great writer, and wrote a great essay last year that went nuts about LinkedIn and how egregious LinkedIn has become, and just the falsity of people.
Oh, absolutely.
Grandstanding on that platform. So
you had this disposition from somewhere that was, I'm going to oversimplify and say anti-authoritarian, but deeper than that. Adam's got the same problem, by the way, and so
you don't get ahead that way in big organisations
because you can't toe the line, and you can't lie to people, and
Correct.
you can't be deferential to morons, basically.
Correct, and big organisations are full of time wasters. I mean, big organisations are full of people whose job is to create a workflow to justify them being there. Otherwise, they don't need to be there. And I just see straight through that and go, I do not need to waste my time with you. And as a 25-year-old or 27-year-old or however old I was, that's not going to get you far, except in journalism.
And so you go into this, you end up in Rear Window, and it feels like almost like the perfect place for you to express who you are as a human being.
Yep.
And the very supportive editor from the outside, but must have been very supportive on the inside.
Yeah, sure.
And then you leave that. And you kind of
later,
alluded to it at the end of the book of like you felt like it was you can go out on top and it was the time to go. And so I'm not looking for exclusives, but you go and write this book, which it must have been an ordeal to write this book. It's not easy to write a book.
Sure was.
How do you think about the next step of what you're going to do in life after this?
Well, I'm right in the zone of thinking about it now.
Yeah.
Because, I wrote, as you say, I was down a rabbit hole writing this book all year. Then it comes out and you're running around talking to people about the book, and that's not over yet either.
And it goes better than expected because and the reason I say this, most people write books and they're never heard from again, right? Like they just go into the ether.
Yeah, that's the great fear. So I'm now entering this period where I do need to figure out what I'm going to do, and I need to figure it out fairly quickly. And my inclination is probably to stay in journalism because that's what I'm good at, and nothing that I've discussed with people about, working in a corporate way or even in an advisory consultancy type way has a great deal of appeal to me. Again, that will, even if you're being paid for your honest advice, really you're not, because those consultants they don't last very long because important people, they just want to have their own views fed back to them. And even if they did want to hear my views, is that really what I want to do with my life? Probably not. So I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah.
I think I want to stay in journalism. I'm figuring out how to stay in journalism and if I can stay in journalism.
Well, you definitely can. Adam and I obviously are both from an entrepreneurial kind of bent, and there are not many people in this world that have brands in journalism, but you do. And we live in an era where the individual brand drives everything. I don't want to use the word influencer because it's a vomitous word, but obviously I'm not telling you anything that you haven't thought about. Like your cachet is extremely high, and you're amongst the business community and maybe even the broader community is very high. It would be terrible to lose you from journalism, terrible. And I think this is one of the few occasions in maybe history where someone who is really good at journalism can actually make a ton of money by doing it if they have a brand. So I think you're kind of in the perfect time for your skill set.
That's the question that I don't know the answer to. You that's an assertion you make, but I think you got to remember Australia has a pretty small TAM, as we like to say in your world. And if I was in the US and I started a Substack, I do suspect I could make a killing. In Australia, I'm not saying that, I'm not going to start a Substack, I should say, but if I was to in Australia, I think the real question is how big's the audience, and how big is the audience really? It's a very specific sort of relatively narrow subject area, but the people who are interested in it are really interested in it, and they need the content, and they'll pay quite high prices for it. And so it is sort of a, lick your finger, stick it in the air and
well, there's something bigger than that though, which is, I think, like, just to continue, because I think it's a very interesting discussion. Like, what you have is the ability to bring a decent sized cohort of affluent people to something
Yeah.
because you're there. And it doesn't just have to be your thing. I think your real power is your ability to attract larger numbers of affluent people to something bigger that they might want. And it's no secret. That's why the Finnet was paying you a large amount of money, and that's why they stuck you on the back page. I mean, that wasn't a happy day for Chanticleer, I'm sure. And so, I love James Thompson, but
James Thompson was not there. At
I know, but he would have loved to be on the back page. And so, I think the feedback that I would give, and I'm sure Adam agrees, is sometimes it's hard to feel the way that an audience feels about you, but I think there is a large affluent audience that will follow you where you go, and you should think about monetizing the shit out of that. I don't often swear, but you should think about monetizing the shit out of that.
Value capture, value create. And
That's right.
I told you, the amount of people that messaged me when you resigned from the AFR, that was just like, it was like someone died. I was morose for a month. I'm still morose about it, actually, to be honest.
I'm not dead. I'm just resting.
We'd love to see.
And Miriam's done a good job. We should say Miriam's done a good job.
Miriam's not Joe. And in fairness to, and I think Mark's done an okay job, but again, he's not Joe. So it's just impossible. You left it unfairly to Mark. Impossible to fill.
Well, I think one of the things that was really great about Rear Window was that it was Miriam and me. Because Miriam is not me, and that's part of what makes her great. And what makes her great, particularly when we're writing together. And I might go quite hard, and she sort of has more of that reserved thing, and it works quite beautifully. And you do sort of give each other, you do yin and yang. I remember when she went on maternity leave last time, and I worked with Michael Rodden, and Michael Rodden was throwing haymakers even bigger than the ones I throw. And so it sort of led me to pull back a little bit. And I mean, I didn't sort of become Miriam, but I also really sort of just pulled back a bit. So having the two columnists, I think, really works quite nicely. But that's just an observation from the past. The other thing, of course, is you got to realise, we're in the defamation capital of the world, so that's something. That is something you go, oh yeah, I can make all this revenue, but then I think of the legal costs, and you go, oh, I'd really need to make a lot of revenue to self-insure.
You got to pay some high premiums.
So say that again.
You can insure defamation, obviously.
There is no insurance company in the world that would insure me.
You can always get insurance. You just have to pay a premium for it. It comes down to how much the
premium is. Sure, but I mean at a reasonable level.
I will say one thing about that defamation case, because obviously, we're not going to go into detail on it, but I thought the thing that I thought was most unfair about the commentary when you lost that case was the assertion by some people that it was misogynistic. And I think what you've proven with Alex Melly and Alan Joyce is that you're an equal opportunity offender, basically. And Rio Tinto,
and the other guys, Rob Shan, there was.
That always sort of gave me the shits a little bit. Eventually, you just realise people are going to say stuff about you. Yeah. I'm in the saying stuff about people business, and if people want to say stuff about me, then I should bloody take it on the chin. So that's what I try and do. However, the misogyny thing was a cheap shot, and there was nothing in Elaine Stead's case that alleged misogyny. Yeah. It was said only for a headline.
Yeah.
And that was very disappointing to see Sue Chrysanthu, Dr. Stead's barrister, use that line.
You're a good friend now.
Well, apparently, yes. But that's all water under the bridge, and you win some, you lose some.
So in the line of work that you're in, you're out on the edge, and some people love you, and sometimes you'll be persona non grata. And so what's it like living that life where when you walk into a room, you're not really sure how people are going to react to you if they know you?
Yeah, well, in the early years, it was really hard. It's not a natural instinct to it's not a natural instinct as a profession, do things that will upset people. I mean, it's not natural for us to seek out conflict. And I was sort of, to be honest, a fairly conflict avoidant person. And that meant that I dealt with the fact that I was in conflict every day in really unhealthy ways. I don't deal with it in unhealthy ways anymore. And you can get used to it and come to accept it if you get to a place where you're really confident that what you're saying is fair and right. And if you come right through the front door and you seek both sides and you consult with people that you're going to criticise, and you get to a position of comfort that what you say is fair and right, I can sleep at night. But it's also it's a momentum game. The thing about writing Rear Window is the worst day of the year is the first day. So you just got to get into the movement of things. And so when you're in the motion of just column after column after column, and people are, attacking you and counter-attacking, I should say, and complaining, and there's pressure and there's all of this controversy, it just starts to wash up over you because you get used to it. But then if you're not used to it, it's hard. It's hard. It's a shock to the system. And I got to a place by 2023 where I was ready to leave anyway, for the reasons that you sort of alluded to. I wanted to go out on top. I wanted to actually walk the talk, and for all the people I'd harangued out of high office, I thought maybe I should probably follow my own advice. But it was also just the exact timing felt right, because I just got to a point where I was a bit tired of the constant hostility. It just started, and I hadn't felt that before, at least not for a really long time. But I did walk into the AFL lunch hosted by Richard Goyder, and I'd been calling on him to resign as chairman of Qantas for every other day for a month, and he was sort of the last person to realise that he was finished, and that wasn't an enjoyable feeling. Because I as I've said, I like him and I think he's a nice man.
He's nice,
and that was unfortunate that was necessary. But, in that room, you've got all the club presidents, you've got all the media broadcasters, the CEO of the sponsors, all the powerful people around town. And I'm just looking around going, oh, this person's staring at me, hates me. This person hates me. That person hates me, beat them up last week. And I just went, oh, God, I don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I don't. And I'm just going to, it's time to do something different.
Well, you'll always be, I say this really from the bottom of both of our hearts, like you'll be persona most grata on this podcast. And anytime you want to come on and talk about any of the stuff that we're talking about, like we would love to have that conversation with you. We'd love to have it with you.
Count me in.
We love the book, Joe. You're a superstar of
Highly
Australian
recommend.
media. Australia's J.K. Rowling, as I said. We asked for half an hour. We got an hour.
By the way, I don't want to become the persona non grata to the trans community that J.K. Rowling is.
You're not J.K. Rowling because you're not cancelled. I mean, that's down to.
J.K. Rowling for good writing. We might actually. I've gotten a copy of your book. If you can get your sign, we'll give it to a listener who promotes our show the best on LinkedIn. We'll get the copy of Joe's book. It's absolutely. If you haven't bought a copy, jump on Amazon and get one. It is a
all good bookstores.
I don't support Amazon. I don't go buy from a bookstore.
Okay, you can buy it from anywhere.
I disclose I am an Amazon shareholder, and so.
I still don't support people buying books from them. So I'm sorry. I don't think it's going to have much of an effect.
I like Amazon, but anyway. Thank you, Joe. That was amazing. You're a superstar, and we can't wait to see you back writing again full time, because we've struggled to get through the day without it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.